After episode 3 of Obi-Wan, I made a grave mistake that I'm happy to say I tend not to make as much these days. I looked at people's opinions on Twitter, and after about 5 minutes of scrolling, I thought to myself, the title of this video, why do Star Wars fans hate everything?
Turn off the flash, you fucking moron!
Now obviously this is a generalization, focusing on a small but very vocal sector of Star Wars fans. I know there are many, the majority, I would assume, who just watch the movies and shows and like and don't like what they like and don't like, and carry on with their days. But there's definitely a piece of that fandom that gives the impression that they hate everything. So today, I wanted to try to explore what has led to this culture that can be seen with lots of franchises these days, but especially around Star Wars, and why the discourse can feel so intensely negative. Okay, first things first, Twitter sucks, just as a ground rule.
You know about Twitter?
If you want to be in a bad mood, go on entertainment Twitter. It's people arguing, and then people being dicks, and then people arguing about people arguing, and then people being dicks about that, and it's an endless cycle of frustration and annoyance, and God, it makes you happy for the ability to close your computer or turn off your phone and just go do something else. My point is, I'm aware that toxic movie culture is amplified on Twitter because it's just an awful social media, but I do still see these kinds of overwhelmingly negative Star Wars opinions elsewhere as well. The thing that fascinates me most about Star Wars fandom in general is a shift in attitude towards the films as time passes, and more specifically, as people get older. When the Star Wars prequels came around, people who'd grown up on the original Star Wars trilogy saw them and generally hated them. They were a weird bastardization of a lot of things they loved, they were poorly written and acted, they added unnecessary lore, they had this character, garbage, we hate it. And there was an intense backlash in the following years that was one of the first famous examples of extreme fan backlash, leading to real consequences for actors involved and showing that Star Wars fans could be a little too intense about their fun space wizard movies. Like what you like, don't like what you don't like, critique what you want. Don't harass actors because you don't like their performance though. You know, pretty basic rule to live by. However, you know who did love those movies? Kids who didn't write film reviews at the time. And as those kids have grown up, and as a byproduct gotten more vocal, the love for the Star Wars prequels has increased online, now to the point where they're seen by some to be better than the originals. Which for the record, if anyone has been on the internet since before the new Star Wars films, the idea of the Star Wars prequels being beloved is crazy. They used to be the easiest punchline on the internet. Anyway, at first this started in a bit of an ironic way, lots of meme templates being used, but slowly the narrative has shifted to, unironically, these films now being beloved, mainly from younger people who grew up with them, now getting older and having more of a voice about films. And I think this may be an element of, when you love something as a child, in this case entertainment-wise, in your older years you stand by it. You almost treasure it and protect it because it's something personal to you. Even if you can see flaws with it, you go, that movie is goddamn awesome, because it was part of your childhood, and you have a connection to it. To a certain extent, I think that's how some fans acted with the original trilogy as well, ignoring some of its flaws because it's attached to childhood memories of theirs, and they end up promoting these movies to this godly status of film. I'm guilty of this too, of course. One example would be the National Treasure movies, I can admit are not masterful works of art.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
And yet I'd still vehemently defend them because I loved them so much growing up, and I'm sure everyone can think of films like that. Also, side note, I also think it's really interesting how meme culture and film or TV meme templates shift as the younger fans of something get older. We saw it with the Star Wars prequels, the original Spider-Man films, tons of DreamWorks movies. All of these are from the same era, in case you didn't notice. And now Breaking Bad, as people like me who watched it when, let's be honest, they were probably too young to be watching it, have gotten a bit older. I don't know, I find it very interesting, and it can affect the discourse around films. The Raimi Spider-Man films were always well liked and not as controversial as the Star Wars prequels, but they've ascended to god-tier movies as of late because kids who grew up with them are now older and the ones having the film discussions online. I guarantee you in a few years the Garfield Spider-Man films will have a similar ascension, and then the Holland Spider-Man movies like 15 to 20 years from now. Anyway, I am getting off topic here. The kids who loved the prequels growing up are now teens and young adults, and they now see that as the benchmark of Star Wars film quality. And that is where I think some more of this hate is coming from now for this modern Disney era. In a kind of similar way to how the prequels were over-the-top hated for years, it's different from the thing I liked growing up, and for that reason, it is bad. Now again, I like to stress I am talking about a specific sector of Star Wars fans who are very toxic and seem almost determined to feel negatively about the new Star Wars stuff. There are some people who just didn't like the new movies, and obviously, that's fine. It's when people are so angry and hateful about it that it perplexes me and why I wanted to make this video. And that's an interesting shift also with the prequels, which the one-dimensionness of it I'll talk a little bit more about later. The prequels went from the worst thing ever created to the best movies ever on the internet since like 2013. It's kind of nuts. And even with this new Star Wars saga, it's been fascinating to watch the public perception of it evolve as well. When Force Awakens came out, it was beloved. Everyone was like, oh my god, Star Wars is back. And then within just a few years and some film choices, it's like, these are the worst movies ever. And that's that fandom mentality that doesn't just apply to Star Wars, but it is a great case study for it. Something's either the worst thing ever or the best thing ever. Also, before you come at me, that does just make for a good title and thumbnail, alright? The Last Jedi did some controversial stuff with the lore, and then Rise of Skywalker wasn't great. Now this whole new Disney era is garbage, as opposed to when Force Awakens came out, and it was the best thing to ever happen. To elaborate on a point I made earlier, it is obviously fine to like or dislike movies and to talk about why you like or dislike them. That's literally my job. It's this pattern of hate mixed with nostalgia, mixed with shifting emotions around Star Wars, and a simplicity of this is the best thing or the worst thing ever that just seems exhausting, and why I tend not to read comments or look at tweets anymore. All of these films have flaws. In my personal opinion, the original trilogy is good and fun, and I think people maybe take them a bit too seriously because they're fun, goofy space movies that definitely have silly parts to them, but they're enjoyable. I think the prequels aren't very good, but have some fun stuff in them, but are poorly written generally. I think the new trilogy started really strong and had some interesting ideas, and Rise of Skywalker was then pretty bad. And you can agree or disagree with any of that, and that's totally fine, but it's preferable to handle it in the way of these are fantasy movies that can be fun to talk about, rather than this movie was disappointing, and that is an affront to your very being. Now I get that being over the top and whatnot when discussing movies can be fun, or you can slip into that. Honestly, if you listen to the Poorly Planned podcast, Freddie and I do slip into that rhetoric of, this is the most boring movie I've ever seen in my life, and that kind of stuff. And it can be fun to nitpick, like when Freddie and I talked about Doctor Strange 2 and went over how dumb some little moments were. That can be fun to do. Or like when the Weekly Planet talk about the Harry Potter films and spend most of the time talking about how dumb little details of that world are and how many plot holes there are. Those are some of their most hilarious episodes. Obviously, film criticism is a normal thing, and it's fine to be a bit over the top or nitpicky on plot holes at times. And this is not me just trying to cover my ass if people come and say, well, you talk about things being the best or worst thing ever on the pod. Because sometimes, yeah, I could definitely tone that down. I'll own that. You get caught up in the conversation. And also the pod is inherently a bit over the top in a jokey way by design. But anyway, my point is, it can be fun to do that, especially if you're having a conversation with a friend or you're trying really hard to express how something made you feel or whatever, especially if you're a bit self-aware of it. But why does that have to be a constant state when discussing films and media in general? Like that constant, this is the worst thing ever, or that constant nitpicking of tiny details just feels so exhausting. Like I saw a thing about Obi-Wan on Twitter that was like, they really made Obi-Wan Kenobi wear goggles in the scene? So? There was no criticism there, there's nothing funny there, you weren't trying to have an interesting conversation, it's just a slight detail that you personally seem to not like for some reason. Maybe Ewan McGregor doesn't pull off those goggles in an aesthetic way, in which case I'm sorry you feel that way, but also why are you so mad about it? And my final note here, and this one might be a bit controversial, but it's about the modern era of fandom and movie TV culture and how invested and obsessed people are with these properties. Now I'm not here to fan shame or nerd shame anyone for being really into a certain TV show or movie franchise or whatever. Because A, that'd just be a dick thing to do, and B, it'd be the most ironic thing in the world, considering, you know, all of this. I now pay for the roof over my head and my food by being so interested in movies that I started making YouTube videos about them when I was 12, okay?
Welcome to BHL Hudson, and these are Captain America, the Winter Soldier, predictions.
I am not here to nerd shame. I would lose that battle handedly. I do think there is something to be said for the unhealthy investment and obsession some people have in entertainment franchises that leads to genuine anger and ruining of their days when a movie or show does something they don't like. And I get being disappointed by a movie you were really excited for, or being annoyed a franchise you're super invested in did something you think is dumb. If in the next Creed movie, Adonis dies in the first 5 minutes and the rest of the movie is Rocky carrying his corpse around Weekend at Bernie's style until he somehow wins a boxing match, I would be pissed. Probably more so confused, but pissed. But there is this next level of investment in these properties that I think the internet age has brought with it. And also the kind of franchise boom of the last 10 years, where with the internet, movie discussion with millions of people is extremely easy and accessible, and now there's so much content to talk about because there's a new Marvel or Star Wars thing every month. Back in 1980, you had to wait 3 years between Star Wars films. Now there's a new film or Disney Plus show or comic or whatever practically every day. And I think those two factors have contributed to some people getting so invested in these franchises, like Star Wars, that I do think it genuinely negatively affects their lives when something they don't like happens, and that's part of why there's so much seemingly over-the-top anger. And maybe that's why, if, for example, one Disney Star Wars thing was really bad in their opinion, now everything is terrible from Disney, regardless. It's like the saying, this movie ruined my childhood, which is kind of just thrown around now, but some people mean that without any exaggeration. They feel personally attacked by the quality of a film. Just listen to that. It's not that personal. Or like, this movie ruined Luke Skywalker. You can think that, but to stew on it for years and take out hate on the people making these movies feels a bit unhealthy, if you ask me. True story. When I saw Age of Ultron in the cinemas when I was 13, I was so excited for it. The first Avengers movie was my favorite movie of all time at that point. I was beyond hyped. And when I walked out, because it was just okay and it was kind of disappointing, I honestly felt bad. Like, the rest of my day, I wasn't happy. And that's one moment when I realized maybe I'm too invested in this stuff, because my fun hobby of being into these movies genuinely crept into my real life that day and made me unhappy. I sometimes even get that with UFC now. I'm so invested that if a fighter I really like loses, sometimes in the past year or so, it has affected the rest of my day. And I just don't think that's a healthy relationship with media. It's important to remember this stuff is entertainment. It isn't your life. And the movie discourse, no matter how into it you are now, and you run a Star Wars hate blog or whatever, all of us movie nerds online started out doing this because it's fun, because we enjoy talking about movies. I still enjoy talking about movies, and some of these people, I feel like you've just lost the fun of it. I'm not saying you have to like everything, but just it's not that serious. You don't have to be that angry about stuff. I think all of this is something people need to remind themselves of sometimes. And I'm not trying to stand here on my soapbox and try to lecture you on how to live your life. I'm just saying, as much as you may not like a show or movie, and you can express that opinion online, remember that at the end of the day, it's completely optional to watch this stuff, and it isn't that serious. Watch it if you want, critique it if you want, hate watch it if you want, I don't care. But remember that it is entertainment. It is a fun bonus to your life. It is not everything. And this argument isn't when you give a negative review of something and people say, well, just don't watch it then. You can watch stuff, and if you don't like it afterwards, of course you can say I don't like it. It's just the constant stream of anger and hate and not liking stuff that it's just a good thing to remember. This is all supposed to be fun. This is all optional. You can turn off the TV whenever you want. I don't know. This is a bit of a messy video. Also, I know I said final note, but quick last thing here. I know there is also an element of racism and sexism and whatnot in the toxic fandom conversation seen recently with the whole Moses Ingram situation from Obi-Wan. And I haven't really talked about that here because I'm addressing a different sector of fans. Fans who are vitriolic about the quality of these products and seem to hate everything, but not ones who are racist or sexist. In that case, that's just dumb, obviously. But that's not the conversation I was trying to have here because that's open and shut. This was more about the nuances of fan culture that isn't racist, because fan culture that is racist should not exist. So in conclusion, I am aware that this video was a bit rambly and all over the place. I'm sorry, I just had a lot of thoughts in my head about this that I wanted to get out there. This started out as a Star Wars specific thing and kind of weaved in and out of general toxic fandoms discussion, and I hope it was generally coherent in some way. My conclusion would be, I think it appears a certain sector of Star Wars fans are overly negative and always angry because the nature of social media that highlights those with the most controversial or volatile opinions, the growth of over-the-top fandom and movie discussion that has come as the internet has grown, the fickleness of some fans and how opinions change over time as different generations grow older, and this is something I didn't touch on a lot in this video, but I think is important, people get swept up in a narrative and some people don't like nuance. Some Disney Star Wars stuff can't be good, and then some is bad, and then some is okay. It's either all amazing because Disney is our savior, or it's garbage because Disney is the devil. And that's definitely seen with other franchises as well, like Marvel and DC, and even with the Star Wars prequels, which I don't think are good, but people are definitely overly critical of those as well. It's a whole thing. It's a whole dumb, crazy thing. We're all just nerds talking about movies, alright? Let's try to take it a little less seriously. My point was, narratives are a big thing here too that people get swept up in. That's basically all I wanted to say. Even if no one watches this video, it felt good to get all those thoughts out of my head and somewhat loosely structured. As far as my thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi so far, yeah, it's pretty okay. So those are my thoughts on fandoms these days, especially the Star Wars one, and why movie discourse can seem so constantly intrinsically negative from some people at times. What do you think of all of this? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, my TikTok at BHLHudson, my Letterboxd at RealBHLHudson. Check out this podcast that I do with a friend of mine where we talk about movies, TV shows, a bunch of nonsense. It's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.